Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and this is today's bonus upload to end the day with. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you all know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to tonight's bonus, shall we? Today's first part of the upload. My girlfriend at the time lived out east of the city in a newly developing neighborhood. On the weekends, I would hang out with her until about 10 p.m. or so. Then I'd walk the half a mile or so down the road to where they were building new ones. I'd go and let myself into the ones that were pretty much complete and sleep on the floor in one of the bedrooms. One weekend, I get into the house and I decide I'm going to sleep in, and I'm lying on the floor in the living room, just kind of chilling. All the lights are off except for the kitchen light. It was on when I got into the house. I figured it'd be best to just leave it on. It's probably somewhere close to 12 p.m., I'd say. I hear some noises coming from the backyard. I go and open the back door, and I see this huge wolf-like creature standing there with its back to me. Now, this is a new home, so there is no deck or patio, and the back door is probably 3 to 4 feet off the ground. I'm 5'8", standing in this house, and this thing was just a bit taller than me, standing just a few feet away with its back to me. It's black and hairy, wolf-like frame, but standing on 2 legs. There's no light except for a little bit coming from the kitchen window. It turned its head toward me enough where I was able to see a pretty good outline of its head. I remember seeing its muzzle with lots of drool, and its eyes were glowing a bright yellow, reflecting from the kitchen light, I'm pretty sure. It let out a very deep growl and curled its upper lip, showing its teeth. I slammed the door. I can't remember if I tried to lock it or not. I ran upstairs to the bedroom on the other side of the house, closed and locked that door to the room, and looked out the window that was facing the street. I was making sure it didn't circle around to the front, but I also wanted to be able to jump out of the window if I heard it come into the house. I remember thinking it could probably jump from the street right through the window, even though I was on the second floor. So I kept staring intently out of the window while keeping my ears open for the sound of anything in the house. I never heard or saw the thing again. I sat up all night, sitting under the window and staring at the bedroom door. I left at first light and walked around until probably 6 or 7 in the morning, and then went back over to my girlfriend's house. I stopped staying at those homes after that. To be fair, I never saw it change from a man to a wolf or vice versa. People have offered other suggestions, such as skinwalker, shapeshifter, etc. I hadn't heard of those things at the time, and I really didn't even think about the paranormal at all. I was mostly just into girls, like most of the guys my age. But yeah, to this day when I think about this, I still think it was a Dogman. Today's second encounter. This is a weird event that happened a few years ago that I still really don't understand. Now I understand sharing encounters brings up questions of authenticity and the truthfulness about whoever's telling it. It's impossible to tell if the encounter is made up or not, which I fully understand, and I do not expect anyone to believe me. Just to hear me out and think for yourselves, that's all I ask. Now maybe even saying that makes it seem fishy. Anyway, a couple years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to take the 2-week trip out to the state of Washington. We did not plan anything out, we just figured it out along the way. We first visited the Yakima, then traveled up to Seattle, then out to Olympia, Bremerton, then the Forks. We ended up deciding to go to the Hoh Forest National Park. I don't want to drag on about everything we did before it happened because I don't find it applicable to the story. I can if you think it may apply to the story. Anyway, when we were navigating to the Hoh Forest, somehow we got lost. We ended up going about 20 miles off track and ended up in what looked like a tree logging operation area. There were a bunch of wide open sections with tree stumps as far as the eye could see. As we were driving through this area, the sun was setting. I don't know exactly what time this happened, but off in the distance, maybe 125 yards, I could see movement off to the left side of the road. Whatever it was moving fast. It was running from left side of the road to the right side. At first, I thought it was a deer. Once it crossed the road, I got very confused. It was running on its hind legs. I watched it for around 15 seconds before it disappeared into the forest. It had to have been running at least 30 miles an hour or more. Now, it may have been a bear, but I don't know if they can run that fast on their hind legs, or if they do that at all. Well, my brother, definitely not a bear. Dogman, Sasquatch, either way, bipedal cryptid. Definitely freaky. Today's third encounter. I have an encounter that happened to myself and my friends. We were on a Boy Scout camping shooting trip. There were 20 to 30 of us. We were in a little cabin with windows on the front and back, a front and back door as well. There were wooden tables all around the area. The adult cabin, with a bathroom, was about 1/8 of a mile down a gravel road in the dark. There was obviously a buddy system because, well, it's Boy Scouts, right? So it's around midnight and everyone's telling scary stories, like normal camping trips. I've got to go to the bathroom. I asked my friend to come with me. He says, sure. He got out our knives. It made us feel safer. Well, we went down to the bathroom and began our walk back. This is where everything gets strange. I felt an instinctual, not sure if that's the right word, fear. I looked at my friend and he had the same look as me. We began to walk a little faster, unfolding our pocket knives. I then turn around and see it. It's similar to a cat, but it's 6 feet tall on its hind legs, kind of hunched over. I freak the heck out and start running. My friend sees it as well. We start sprinting back to our cabin. It begins to make this moaning, howling noise. It was somewhere between the two and followed us slowly. We pound on the door and the guys let us in. We told them what we saw. They actually believed us, so we locked the front door and looked out the back. It had no lock. We pushed a table against it and had a kid there with a knife for safety. We drew the blinds on all the windows that had them. One of them did not, and we sat there with the lights on. Then we see these eyes outside of the windows without blinds. We're all crapping ourselves, and this thing slowly walks to the back door. We heard it bumping against it, maybe trying to open it, we think. It then left, but we still thought we were going to die. No one slept that night. When the adults came to wake us up, we told them, and they laughed and said we were making stories up. We know it happened. Even if they don't believe us, it was in northern Virginia, about 60 miles east of Washington, D.C. Today's fourth part of the upload. Growing up, I lived in northeast Arizona, literally 5 miles south of the Navajo Reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, skinwalkers were a huge topic of conversation amongst the locals, and we all took it pretty serious. Stories of personal experiences abounded. I was no different. Well, to start off my set of stories, I was 9 or so. My family had gone camping in this little spot about 50 miles or so south of town called Hart Canyon. near Wiggins Crossing, if anyone's interested. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area, as we had camped there at least 20 times before. So my parents just let me wander around in the woods alone. This is back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some G.I. Joe guys that I had been playing with on a nearby creek, about 80 yards from the campsite. There were no other campers there with us. My mom had called me back to camp for the dinner, so I left and ate, played around the camp for a while, and realized I had forgotten my toys back at the creek. I took a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew where I had left them, so in no time I found them, grabbed them up. As I was squatted down to grab them on the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I never felt before ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen because of the fear, like the little boy on E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight to the other side of the creek, about 10 yards down the way. I saw something. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought it may have been a bear, but it was too skinny and not enough puffy hair. It sunk between a tree and peered out slightly at me. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read a little bit about Bigfoot for the first time, since it wasn't popular in my area. I thought for a long time that is what I saw. I finally had seen enough to gather my wits and scream as fast as I could back to camp. I told my parents, and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination, so I stayed close to them for the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at my house. I have 2 dogs. They were outside and lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night they went psycho, barking at first at something in the alley behind the house. Then they both started whimpering. I had my window open slightly, and one of my dogs straight up jumped up to the window, frantically, chewed through the screen of the window, forced its way into the house, and would not leave the house for 3 days. Another time I was about 13. We used to play night games in my town, mostly there being nothing much else to do. We would walk around our neighborhood, act suspicious so the cops would come and chase us around. And we'd run down alleyways, hop into random folks' backyards and hide. Now it was extremely common to see an intoxicated native in the alley or the street, so it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house that night, as we being 2 of my friends and myself, ran from the police car hot on our tail. We saw him plain as day standing in our way. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the cops to pass us and hopped back out. Literally about 3 minutes went by. We ran the way we came, and as we got to the point where the native had been standing, he was gone. Legit in his place was a coyote standing there watching us. We ran right past it, feet from it. And anyone knows coyotes, they will bail out way before you get close to them. This bugger held its ground and calmly sat and watched us run past him. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month after that. My last experience was when I was about 15 or 16. My brother had a girlfriend that lived in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines, about 25-mile-ish. Well, we went to go see her one day, and as we drove out, about 15 miles out, we saw a native guy standing on the side of the road, which was quite odd because the res was north of the town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town because it's just desert and forest for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we see this guy. He looked normal enough, flannel shirt, jeans. We get to our destination, hung out with my brother's girlfriend and her family well into the night. When we decided to head back home, we hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot, we saw the native dude. He was still there. I remember thinking, dude was crazy standing out there all day into the night. What's he doing? Right as we pass him, we hear a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first, I thought we hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything. We ran over. I turned to look back at the window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. In the brake lights, I see the native guy chasing after us. We were easily going 55, 60 at this point, as we were about to stop. The guy's on the road, feet behind us. I screamed to my brother, "Do not stop, gun it, man, gun it." He does, and being a Chevy S10, it has a speed governor on it at 80.2 miles. This guy keeps up with us. We're seriously freaking out. I asked my brother, what if we don't make it back to town? Or what about when we have to slow down and go to the house when we get close? After the 2-mile stretch, it took forever. I look back and he's gone. We get home, book it into the house, and told our parents. Next morning, I get up to head somewhere and look at my brother's truck, thinking about the night before. I wondered what the loud bang was just before we started getting chased. Inspecting the truck, I found a handprint smeared in dust, about 2/3 over the right, then smeared to the right taillight. I never went there again. Today's fifth encounter. This didn't happen to me, but was told to me by my ex, her dad, who was there, and the guy it happened to, my ex-brother-in-law. None of them were prone to tall tales or embellishing facts. About 3 decades ago, mid-80s, in the Appalachian forest of central PA, my brother-in-law was hunting whitetail during early archery season. He, as well as all of his family, are avid hunters. Hunting, fishing, trapping, boating, camping, etc. In all seasons, this particular brother-in-law was close friends with a well-known outdoorsman from books, documentaries, and had his own TV show for years, and was as home in the woods as most folks are in their living room. Late in the afternoon, he tagged a nice buck quite some distance from the cabin, so he quickly gutted it and began the long drag back, hoping to get it back to camp before dark. As he described it, about 15 minutes into the trek, he became aware of something behind him. The further he went, the more certain he became that whatever it was following him. It probably locked onto the blood scent of the deer. He knew it was big due to the sounds he could hear in the brush and an occasional snort-like. He knew there were sightings of mountain lions in the area, and bear were fairly common, as well as bobcat and wild dog, but this just didn't seem to fit any of them. He quickened his pace, but not only did whatever it was behind him keep up, but it seemed to be closing the gap. Finally, he took a desperate gamble, threw the deer across his shoulders, and all but sprinted as best as he could through the heavy brush mountain laurel for the remaining 1/4 mile to camp. After he covered about half the distance, behind him he heard a blood-curdling howl from the approximate area where he had shouldered the deer. His heart racing, adrenaline pumping, he covered the remaining distance to the cabin in record time, even leaping across the creek while still carrying the buck. All the while, you could hear growls and screams mingled in with loud pops and cracks, almost like gunshots. At camp, the others had already returned and were standing outside, listening to the commotion when he came running in. They quickly hung the deer in the shed, locked it, and locked themselves in the cabin. The sounds continued on and off for close to an hour at different points. Around the cabin, then everything went quiet. Needless to say, nobody slept very soundly that night. The next morning, they went to investigate the area where the original sounds had come from, hoping to identify whatever it was. The ground was too hard and too rocky for any conclusive tracks, but what they did find, not more than 15 yards from where he had shouldered the deer, none of them could explain. In the middle of a thick stand of mountain laurel, an area of about 20 feet by 20 feet, had been literally ripped apart. Laurel is a tough, fibrous, bendy wood, almost impossible to break. These were twisted and snapped as though they were brittle sticks. There were no claw marks, no teeth marks, no antler or horn marks, no saw or hatchet marks. Just splintered, ripped, torn mountain laurel, some as thick as 2 inches. Whatever it was very big, very strong, and extremely mad. That area was torn apart in a fit of rage. Today's sixth encounter. Just a weird thing I encountered on my first wedding anniversary. My wife and I decided to make the drive out to Colorado Springs on a recommendation of a friend of mine. My wife had never seen the mountains before, so I figured the Rockies would be a perfect start. We stayed in a Holiday Inn that was right at the base of the mountain, basically. We had a great view of Pikes Peak as soon as you looked out the window. She was thrilled. She'd never seen anything like this before. She's a sucker for a gift shop as well, so this place was great. We had a great time. On our second day there, we decided to drive up to Pikes Peak. But we were told at the gate that we could go most of the way up, but the very summit was closed off because there was too much snow. We could still get really far up, though. I think Pikes Peak is around 14,000 feet. We got to like 11,000 before it was closed off. So we were up above the clouds, which was awesome, because it just looked like looking out over the ocean. We stopped at this little rest center on the way up to get some hot cocoa for the drive and a magnet for Colorado, since we collect magnets from every state we go to. It was pretty cool because we had a Bigfoot crossing sign along the way, which was really fun to take pictures in front of. Anyway, once we got to the close-off part of Pikes Peak, we parked our car, got out, and kind of just took in the view. I didn't think anyone else was up there with us except the guy a little up the way, sitting in his truck making sure people didn't go up any higher than they were supposed to. Even if we couldn't go to the summit, it was still gorgeous. We took some pictures, all of which were pretty terrible. It was pretty cold. But I'd insisted we buy 511 jackets, pants, and boots for the trek, and my wife didn't understand why I demanded that brand. But if you're a dude, you know. So we're pretty toasty. I wandered off and started looking around the rocks and saw a few trees that were up on the elevation. I just like to explore stuff off the beaten path. I heard some snow crunching nearby and assumed it was another sightseer, so moved toward the sound of the crunching snow, but I didn't see anybody. There were a few trees here and there, but not hard to really see. It was snowing a bit harder and the wind was blowing the snow sideways. I'd gone pretty far from my wife at this point and didn't want to stray too much further, but I was honestly hoping to see a wolf or something. I found tracks in the snow and they were pretty small. The snow was kind of deep, so I couldn't really tell what kind of animal had made them, but it looked like it had walked on all fours. So I was really hoping to see a wolf. I didn't see a wolf. At first, I didn't see anything. I followed the tracks around the tree and kind of carefully peeked around it, but didn't see anything. The track stopped there, though. I didn't get right up on the tree because it was a wolf. I mean, I didn't want to get face to face with it. I'll also say I have no idea if there are wolves in the Rockies. I was just sort of hoping. What I did see eventually was a pure white thing scurrying away from the exact location I was looking. It was pure white. I'm not sure if it was invisible or just blended in perfectly with the snow, but it moved on all fours. It had a huge bulbous head, kind of like the way you think of a typical version of an alien, and it had a spindly body. Its arms and legs were super skinny, and its body wasn't a whole lot bigger. Its arms and legs themselves were really long. I'd say it was probably between 4 and 5 feet if it were standing upright. It was a bit hard to tell with it anyways being on all fours and in the snow. It turned to look at me, and it had a really small black beady eyes, no definite features. Its eyes were really far apart and almost on the side of its head. Its feet and hands were buried, but when it moved, I saw a hand-like thing. It had fingers that were way too long, like not E.T. long, but wiry, spindly-looking fingers. It looked at me for just a second and then leaped forward away from me, and as soon as it landed in the snow, it was invisible again, or I just couldn't see it. Then it hopped again, and it jumped a good 6 or 7 feet from a dead stop and took off running. It ran away from me and scaled some rocks in the distance like it was nothing and crawled along the cliffside. Whenever it was in the snow, it looked invisible, though. I'm not sure if that's because it was all white, or because it was like actually turning invisible. Anyway, it was gone within seconds. When I got back to my wife, she was waiting in the car and didn't believe a word of it and thought I was just trying to scare her. To this day, she doesn't believe me, and I don't know what it was. I've never heard of any cryptid or anything like it, and on the trek back down, I asked the lady at the gift shop if people ever reported seeing weird things, and she just mentioned Bigfoot. Today's final encounter. December 2nd, 2021, my family went out to cut a Christmas tree. We were about 20 to 30 miles away from home, way out in the middle of nowhere in Tioga County, Pennsylvania. This road we were on is fairly regularly traveled by people with Jeeps because the mud is really soft, even when there is snow. When we find a suitable tree and stop and cut it, we get the tree on the ground and my dad is cleaning off some of the branches from the bottom when my mom gets a great idea to throw a rock into the woods right next to the car. After several rocks, my mom was done throwing things when out of nowhere a decent-sized tree branch landed on the roof of the car. This branch was bigger than our tree, which was a problem because our tree was amongst the biggest and tallest in the area. At the time I brushed it off as my dad being silly, since I didn't hear him sawing anymore. We pulled the branch off the car and I went to take a whiz while my dad tied everything down. I walked down the hill about 10 feet until I found a suitable bush. But on my way down, something got spooked from around that spot and took off to my right. I figured I came across a deer or something, so I went down to where it had been to look for tracks so I could identify the animal. I got down there and couldn't find much except some trampled grass and broken branches where the animal had busted through the underbrush. The grass was pretty thick, so I wasn't too upset by not being able to find anything. I returned to my chosen bush, did my thing, but as I was trying to climb back up the side where I had come down, I slipped because of the mud. I was slightly miffed. It was about 20 degrees and about 15-mile-an-hour winds. I had left my coat on top since I had expected to be down there that long. As I'm walking along the side of this hill to where it had been a little bushier, my mom yelled down, "Quit throwing rocks, you hit the window twice." I yelled back I wasn't throwing any rocks and kept going, thinking that my sister was being silly and carrying on with the Bigfoot thing. As I reached the patch of brush that I was going to climb up, I came across what looked like a human print, but without shoes in the mud. It was about 14 inches long and had hair imprinted in it. At first I thought it was a bear, but bears around here don't get much more than 150 to 200 pounds. And even a big one only 7-inch feet. As I'm examining this track, I heard something fly over me. I looked up in time to see a branch landing on top of the hill, which is only a little way up now. I then looked in the direction it came from, just as something was retreating down the hill into the brush. I just caught a glimpse of it, but I noticed it was bipedal, big, tall, and hairy. I freaked, made it to the top in what seemed like seconds, got into the car, totally out of breath, despite only being 20 yards, and hopped in. My dad was just getting in as I ran up, and everyone else was already up there. They asked me what was wrong, and I said, "I don't know, but something down there is throwing things at us, let's go." My parents looked at each other. For once, there is always a real explanation, so let's go find it. My dad didn't hesitate to leave. This is what made me a believer in Bigfoot. About 2 miles down the road, a pickup comes flying up behind us and won't back off. We pulled over in a wide spot, but instead of passing the truck next to us, the driver rolled down his window. It turned out to be a guy my dad knew. He was terrified and said, "Get your ass out of here, I just saw a Bigfoot." We followed him to the main road where we stopped and asked him where he had seen this thing. He said that someone had been cutting a tree up there, probably a Christmas tree, and the thing had been standing on the side of the road watching them. Alright folks, I hope you all enjoyed this end of the day bonus upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you for supporting the channel. Your support is what makes the channel special and what continues for it to grow and go. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions and never stop searching for answers.